Okay, yeah, we had some connection problems there for a second, but looks like we're on. Good, yeah, so getting on a little bit later than normal this week, and it's due to the fact that I had to jump on a Zoom meeting early this evening, so yeah, so we're starting at 7:30 instead of at 7, but hey, that's all good. Welcome, and yes, this week actually, one other thing I was planning to do this week for this week's live stream was to dress up in 18th century attire, since I am going to be talking a little bit about my adventures and time in the living history world, and how that basically how that influences a lot of my work. And I, like I said, was going to dress up in 18th century attire for that, or at least try to, but the way things felt today, that ended up not happening. So, but instead I'm wearing the next best thing, and that is my time traveler shirt, which I got from the very awesome 18th century sutler, or vendor, if you're unfamiliar with what a sutler is. So I got it from Penny River Costumes, and she is, she's really awesome. She has a lot of really cool stuff. So if you're into living history and the reenactment world, definitely check out her store. I'll leave a link to it in the description once this live is over, and it's available at all my other streams. So yeah, so first I want to thank everybody that has watched my live streams so far. This is my my 5th one, and whether you tune in while it's going live or you watch after the fact, I mean, either way, I definitely very much thank you for watching. Yeah, definitely very grateful for that. So without further ado, now I am going to get into the subject of this week's live stream, which, like I said, it's it's my time in the living history world. So so basically, I started in the living history world, and like I said, I'll get into, for those that are just joining us now, I'll get into how that plays out in a lot of the music and the stories that I do. All right, so my time in the living history world, it started in 2015, I believe, 2014, 2015, and the way I came to be in it, well, at that time I was in the process of writing my book series, The Birthright, which, as a lot of you know, and as I've mentioned before, it is a dark historical fantasy series, and so I was obviously doing a lot of historical research for that, researching things through my books, through like the history books that I have, going to the library, looking up different credible articles online, and different websites that specialize in that sort of thing. But of course, you can always go further with the research, and I've always been a lover of history, a student of history. Even the music that I had released I already had released at that time. A lot of it was very much inspired by and steeped in history, and even though my new music is definitely a lot more historically influenced than the older music is, history even, kind of played a huge role in influencing the overall sound of the music that I had released. So in about 2015, I was just looking online because I knew that there were a lot of these living history sites these reenactment sites. And you know, so I was more interested in becoming a member of one, because you know how you can buy a membership to, like a year-long membership to a museum or a theater or things like that. And that was actually my first intention. My intent wasn't necessarily to get involved in living history at first or reenactment, but you know, little did I know that this would end up becoming a huge part of my life. But my very first interest was mainly just in just getting maybe a membership to like one of the local living history museums, and therefore maybe I could get a discount in, you know, to some of the events, or you know, I could maybe have access to maybe the museum libraries that maybe a non-member would not have. So so basically what I did was I looked, you know, I did some research, and I came across, you know, and of course, I mean, I'd heard about this particular museum before, but it was the Depreciation Lands Museum in Allison Park. That was the closest one to where I lived. And so I figured, you know, hey, check that out first. And the way it's set up, it's really cool. It's kind of set up as sort of like a mini village. And, you know, so basically what you do when you tour this place, it's kind of like a self-guided tour, but you go from like building to building, you know, like the cabin, the schoolhouse, which is where I was at a lot of the time. You go from, like, say, the cabin to the schoolhouse to the Covenanters building. You know, you go into the blacksmith shop. You know, it's one of those. And as you kind of guide yourself through that tour, you get to watch some of the online, not online, but, well, now it's online, but you get to watch, like, just some of the demos. Like, you can watch the blacksmith at work. You can watch, you know, the person who's in the cabin cooking. You can watch them at work. So it's one of those places. And that was the very first place that I looked up, that I wanted to check out. So after doing a little bit of online research on it, I ended up saying, you know, yeah, I mean, I'll become a member. It's not that expensive. So I ended up becoming a member of that. You know, I ended up signing up for like a membership. And in one of the questions in signing up was, would you like to be, you know, would you like to volunteer? And I was like kind of looking at, you know, at like what that might mean, you know. And if I have a background in theater as well, theater and performing, so it's not like I was, you know, it's not like I had anything against, you know, kind of dressing up in period clothing and talking to people. It was just, you know, the question of like, you know, how much, how knee deep did I want to get into with my research. So so what I did was I just checked. I was like, yeah, sure. You know what? Why not? I'll at least go see what they're about, see what they have to offer. So yeah, before I continue, take a swig of water. This week, instead of an 18th century mug, I have my mermaid cup. I love this cup. I got it from Starbucks. So this is what I'm drinking from this week. All right. So I checked off the box basically saying, you know, yes, you know, hey, I'll volunteer, I'll see, you know, what positions are, you know, what you're looking for. And because I was like, hey, you know, if you want to, you know, do any archiving, like I didn't know, like I didn't know like what all that might entail, or whether you would actually need somebody to wear period clothing and actually do demonstrations to people. So, you know, I got together with the coordinator of the museum, and turns out they did in fact need a schoolmarm. So, so I go to be in their schoolhouse. So I agreed to do that, and even though I'd never done any, you know, done that particular thing before, I had done children's theater before, and you know, so I was, you know, pretty. Yeah, I'm pretty used to working with kids, so, you know, just doing children's theater. So yeah, so I agreed to do it, and you know, one thing led to another, and I, you know, just started doing research on, you know, being a schoolmarm in the 18th century, because what they focus mainly on is 18th century. But yeah, but I started studying being a schoolmarm in the 18th century, and it was a lot of fun. I very much enjoyed being in the schoolhouse. It was, you know, I mean, of course, you know, sometimes you have your more rambunctious, especially if it's a group of kids, you know, you have sometimes you have more rambunctious groups, and then other times you'll have a group that's actually very, very well behaved. But, you know, like I said, overall I enjoyed it. I really liked coming up with a character. I actually kind of had her whole backstory written out to talk to people about. And the thing about doing something like living history, whether you're doing an actual kind of like a village, like a site where it's set up like a village, or if you're doing something like the John Neville house, which is where I'm a site director out there, doing something like the John Neville house, where it's like more of like a tour throughout, you know, throughout the house, you know, just kind of like a guided tour throughout the house. One thing that you do have to do definitely is really feel out your crowd, like really know how to read your crowd, like just almost like, you know, right off the bat. And of course, that takes a little time, you know. I didn't have too many problems with that because, like I said, you know, my years in theater, you know, even like doing children's theater, I didn't have too many problems with reading my crowd, basically. Reading the people that would come into the schoolhouse, and I would have to play 18th century schoolmarm, you know, to them. I didn't have that, you know, that hard of a time with it. But I know, like, for some people, it takes some getting used to, especially when you're trying to combine history along with like also having to be entertaining, and especially if there's kids in the group, you have to keep the kids entertained. And you know, what if one of the kids is misbehaved, which when you're an 18th century schoolmarm, you can use that kind of to your advantage. I'm not saying like completely like just yell at them, and you know, I'm not saying, you know, rip them a new one if they step out of line, but you know, you can be a bit more stern, you know, of course, if you're the schoolmarm or the schoolmaster. If you have a group of kids and one of them is like trying to be the class clown, if you will, you know, then the way I would handle that is, you know, like, oh, young man or young lady, you know, would you like to know what they would have done with children, you know, in the 18th century, children who acted out? And they'd be like, what? You know, like then like they would suddenly get really quiet and their eyes would get really, really wide, and then I would tell them about, you know, we had everything from like the dunce cap in the corner. Yes, our the 18th century schoolhouse, we did have a dunce cap in there. I would also, you know, kind of get into how if a boy was acting up, what the sometimes the schoolmaster or schoolmarm would do would be to take like the cap off of one of the girl students' head and put it on the boy student's head, things like that. And of course, you know, especially if it was like a boy that was acting up and I had to do that, what they of course, you know, his peers would always like start laughing at that thought, and usually that that, you know, kept the kid in line and everything. A lot of my groups were actually quite good. I don't know if maybe it was just my whole demeanor that I had in the schoolhouse. I don't know if it was maybe my whole demeanor that kind of had them, you know, okay, she means business. But most of my groups were actually quite good. My groups of kids. I mean, every so often I would have, you know, someone that might try to like I said, be the class clown. But overall, I mean, you know, for the most part, really all I would have to do was just kind of do what I just, you know, what I just said, and just kind of instill into them, you know, what might have been done to a child that acted out in the 18th century. So yeah, overall it was a lot of fun. Overall I enjoyed it. I did get to a point to where I wanted to branch out a little bit more. So there were times when I would be in other buildings, but there was, you know, but I got to a point to where I wanted to branch out more. However, I did take great advantage of this time to, you know, especially in between groups. One nice thing about the schoolhouse was that we had a lot of really, really nice books in there. We had a lot of the books that children would have used in the 18th and 19th centuries. We had some original copies. And while the public, at least when I was doing it, while the public didn't necessarily, like, couldn't, you know, handle it, I could handle it for them and show them certain things in the book. But what I would do is I would just, in addition to maybe working on some like sewing projects, I would actually just take advantage of, like, in between groups, like take advantage of reading time. I would be reading and doing research in some of those books and making notes. And, you know, I was doing that not only for being in living history, but also for the music as well as, and the stories. Because like I said, at the time, I was writing a lot of, you know, like the stuff for, like, that, you know, became the birthright. And, you know, so it was really, really nice not only having access to those books and access to that library, but it was also nice to just be in kind of a historical setting. And I really do think that really helped to add to a lot of the research that I was doing for the books, as well as any new music that I might have been getting ideas for. There really is something about having just very, very hands-on research. There's definitely something to just being in the midst of like a historic village, if you will. There's definitely something to just being able to be right next to the blacksmith shop and, you know, just kind of like, you know, just smell the smoke coming from the blacksmith shop. And by the way, I did get some training in blacksmithing. It's a lot of fun. And yes, it is historically accurate for a woman to be in the blacksmith shop. Many, many people were surprised by that. So, but yeah, but, you know, just being there and, like, being in the cabin and, you know, even doing a little bit of cooking in the cabin. All of that, it not only was, you know, I mean, it's a really cool experience to be able to do that, but it was also, for me, just really like it was kind of like it clicked, like, okay, now I can really describe, you know, the, you know, what the sights and, you know, just all the different, you know, just the sights, the smells, the, like, what you would hear. You know, it was really like, it was like just that extra push I needed to, you know, into being able to, you know, just being able to effectively write a historic setting. And I think it really even helped improve my stories all that much more, because a lot of my stories are set against a historical backdrop. So when I started to, you know, just wanting to branch out a little bit more, I had done some 18th century camping at reenactment events, and that just made me want to get involved in reenactment even more. I did later on end up joining a French and Indian War group, Company LaBeouf. It's a French unit, and I mean, not this year unfortunately, but Company LaBeouf, Company Dumas, those are actual French units that participated in the French and Indian War. People, you know, like they, you know, it wasn't just people like sitting around being like, hey, let's call our French unit Company Dumas or Company LaBeouf, you know. No, those are actual units that were at Fort Niagara, for instance, during the French and Indian War. So I am part of that. I have been being a camp follower or civilian at some of these French and Indian War events with my unit, but I am getting involved with artillery and battle reenacting. So I am, those of you that, if you're following me on social media, you probably heard me mention it before, that I am, getting involved with the whole cross-dressing thing. I will be portraying at some point, hopefully next year. I was hoping to do it this year, but next year, an 18th century French soldier. And a lot of people, I have had people ask me why I wanted to do that, and a few different reasons. I mean, I've been doing female personas for quite some time now. Like I said, I started this back in 2015, and and I, and like obviously I like doing female personas. I love, pretty things. I love pretty clothes, and the stuff that, and even like the stuff that the peasants would wear. It's fun to get dressed up in. But I mean, I do prefer the upper class just because I just love dressing up like that. But I've portrayed I've portrayed lower class, working class. I've portrayed middle class or middlings, if you will. And I've also I've done upper class too. So I like getting a little bit of it all. And I think it's nice to do more than one. Now, obviously, if you're just getting involved in living history, I will kind of digress a little bit. If you're just getting involved in living history and reenactment, I would say focus on one thing, at least for that first year. Like for my first year, I focused just like, my thing was being an 18th century schoolmarm. That was my first year. And then later on for the museums, for their Halloween event, they did a witch trial event. I portrayed the witch that was on trial. That was a lot of fun. But case in point, that first year, I was a schoolmarm. Like that was my thing, that was my shtick, that was my character, and that's basically what I stuck with. Now, when we're talking about the second and third year, that was when I started to, want to branch out a little bit and do, a little bit more, like explore some more classes of life, explore, just different type of characters, different types of people that would have been around at that time. Because, people back then were actually quite diverse in not only their cultural background, but also their overall beliefs, their political beliefs. It wasn't, like everybody, because I know a lot of people like to think that everybody back in the olden days was just this ginormous hive mind, except for maybe your one or two oddballs or whatever. But no, even if you listen to Jay's Townsend and his, he does one video where he talks about how, talks about this very thing and says, basically there could have been people that lived only within 5 miles of each other, and they could have had a completely different set of values, a completely different outlook on the world, completely different like political beliefs, political background. So, it's kind of like annoying to me when people like just try to like lump everybody from the past into just this one big, you know, glob of stupidity, basically. But yeah, but like I do think that, you know, once you've been doing this for at least maybe a year, you know, and you want to branch out a little bit more, you can. I've not only, I'm in fact, like now I'm not just sticking with 18th century, you know, I am also, I've been dabbling a little bit in Victorian era, you know, Civil War era, even some Edwardian, late Victorian, and then Edwardian. There's late Victorian, then Edwardian, a little bit of World War I, you know. So I've been kind of like, you know, just exploring different things, even though the 18th century is my main era. I've been, you know, definitely just, you know, just kind of like, just, you know, trying to dip my toes in a couple different ponds because, you know, I love to learn, you know, I love to to be challenged. And that's a big reason why I am going into, doing artillery and also doing like a male persona in my unit too. Cause I do think that a lot, you know, in addition to seeing how different classes might have lived, I'm also interested in just seeing things from both a man's perspective and a woman's perspective, you know, because to me, when you do that, that is how you're going to get the most well-rounded look at history and just all these historical events too. So, yeah, so that's, so that was kind of like the beginning of my, my venture into living history. You know, from there, I joined a living history group, well, my reenactment group. I joined an early music group as well, part of the Pittsburgh Historical Music Society. And the way I came to be part of my, the early music group, Wayward Companions, is also kind of a, you know, cool little story. So basically, at the Depreciation Lands Museum, they would have these tavern nights, and this was actually also during my first year there too. The woman running it asked me to be part of it. She knew I sang, you know, and she knew I had a background in theater as well, so she asked me if I would be willing to do some like almost kind of singing, musical entertainment, doing some like tavern songs for people. And I said absolutely. And as it just so happened, my couple of my future, what would be, was at the time, my future bandmates in Wayward Companions, they were there. They were in attendance at this event, and that was where like I met them. I kind of like, you know, met each other. We got to know each other, and we were, you know, just kind of hanging out. Like, you know, when I was done with with my song and, you know, entertainment and, you know, talking and kind of harassing the those in attendance, which is always a good time. But yeah, but, you know, we got to talking, and I didn't join their group right away that night. Hey, what's up? But I didn't join the group right away that night. You know, I kind of talked to them back and forth. I saw them at some events. I saw them at another event, a Colonial Tea that I was singing at, and it was shortly after being me seeing them at the Colonial Tea and me singing singing at that Colonial Tea that shortly thereafter they contacted me to do something, to, you know, just kind of get together and like we could talk music. And, you know, I was like, yeah, absolutely, you know, I'm always up for talking music, you know. So I got together with them, with Bill and Laura. I got together with them, and yeah, we definitely we all shared our passion for music, our passion for the past, and I officially became part of Wayward Companions. It was the summer of 2016 was when I officially became, I became part of that group. Yeah, it was summer of 2016. Yeah. And at that time, because the Wayward Companions had actually been around for quite some time, for about like 10 years, but they were kind of going through a transitional period, a regrouping period. And if you're in a band, you know, or have been in a band, you know, you probably catch my drift on that one. And even if you're not in a band, you could probably, you know, you probably know what I mean when I say that. But they were kind of going through like a regrouping transitional time when I joined. And we spent the greater part of 2016 just kind of like getting our repertoire together, rehearsing. We really didn't do a lot of gigging that year. We had a couple offers, but we weren't really ready. In fact, I think we only did one gig that year, just to kind of like, you know, try out performing together, you know, me with them. And I think that particular gig, it was just myself, Bill, and Laura. Tom was kind of on, I don't know what Tom was doing. Was he on like a hiatus or something like that? Or I don't know. And Mia wasn't yet in the group either. So it was just Bill, Laura, and I. But you know what? We did it. But we did agree that, you know, we needed the sound to be filled out more. So Tom rejoined the group. And then a little bit later on, Mia came on board. She's our cellist. But 2016, we spent most of the time just rehearsing music, regrouping. And then 2017, we started gigging again. And we've been getting more and more stuff. 2018 was a pretty good gigging year, so was 2019. 2019, we, you know, got offered a few really cool jobs for this year that unfortunately ended up being postponed. But hopefully maybe next year they'll be able to happen. But even being involved with Depreciation Lands Museum, being involved at the John Neville House, being involved with Wayward Companions and the Pittsburgh Historical Music Society, performing with the orchestra. Those have really done quite a bit to, I'd say, not only expand, you know, what I already knew about history, because that's really what's great about, you know, what's great about studying history. It's like you're always learning something new. There's always going to be something that you didn't know. I mean, and every time I go to, you know, I've gone to an event, or, you know, I've talked to somebody in the living history world, you know, there's always something new that I learn. And one thing that we always talk about, among like the history buffs is like, you know, for all we know, there could be some document hidden in somebody's trunk, you know, and that document hasn't yet seen the light of day, but all that document has to do is see the light of day, and it might be enough to change everything as we know it. And, you know, and that's why I like to explore a lot of history in my stories. That's why a lot of, especially the new music that I'm doing, explores a lot of history and historical events. And for me, it's just so exciting, just, you know, unraveling, you know, it's almost like just unraveling, like, you know, and just putting together like just a ginormous puzzle, if you will. And that's why I really enjoy incorporating a lot of, you know, history with my, you know, music and my stories. And then also I love like the fantasy elements too. And a lot of the new stuff is going to be definitely inspired by that. So, and speaking of new stuff, this weekend I am finally unveiling the Darkside of the Labyrinth episodes, which I'm really excited about. Darkside of the Labyrinth, it's like a spin-off of my Inside the Labyrinth podcast and blog. And no, I'm just like extra dry tonight, but But yeah, but I'm really excited to finally release that. It's been a long time coming. And the first episode, it's going to be like completely made by you pretty much. Everything from the 1840s dress that I'm, gonna wear, you voted on, and even like the story I'll be covering, the Jenny Wade story of Gettysburg, you voted for that one. Even the backdrop that I'm using, you voted for that too. So that first episode especially is going to be basically made by you, which is awesome. So that's going to be coming out on Sunday. I'm really excited about it, and I'm excited to see where that would go. So where the plans that I have for it, it's basically kind of, it's what it sounds like. It's kind of like the darker side of, of history. It's like I might even like get into the mythology. I might get into kind of like the mythology of the fairy realms, because there's a lot of cool and even kind of messed up stories along surrounding there. And so it'll be kind of like a more paranormal, kind of dark mythological side to history, as opposed to Inside the Labyrinth and the blog. Those are a little bit more, busting history myths and, doing things like that, and, and interviewing people at events, which I hope to get back to doing soon. So that's where the Darkside the Labyrinth is going. I'm also working on getting my podcast up and running again. So I took a little break from that. And that's why, also why Darkside the Labyrinth kind of took a little bit longer than I hoped, was because I ended up moving, and of course, right when I was moving was right when quarantine and lockdown started. So having to move during that time, it was an adventure, but I did it. But finally, now that I'm settled, I'm able to actually like get started on stuff that have been on the back burner. But with my podcast, I do want to do more, definitely have like a mix of audio and video. I do like doing the video interviews with people when I go to events, the history events, just because it's so cool to see the surroundings, and of course, the sutlers are all dressed up in their period attire. I love doing that. However, I know that there are people that are willing to be interviewed, but they are camera shy. So for that, what I'm going to do is also take along my little audio recorder, hide it maybe in my basket, so that way nobody knows it's there until I say, interview somebody who would maybe prefer just an audio interview and wouldn't want to be on camera. So I do still want to keep doing that at events with the podcast, and have as much of that be video as possible. I do want to have more definitely audio episodes as well, and I do already have a couple of episodes in mind. One of those episodes I discussed at the end of my Love Never Dies or Phantom of the Opera 2 review, and that episode, I don't know if it's going to be the first one, but that one is going to be called What Did Raoul Ever Do to You? And I'll be discussing why in the Phantom of the Opera verse, people seem to just, like Phantom of the Opera fans in general, just seem to love to hate on Raoul, and even like getting into like Les Mis, and people like love to hate Cosette, because heaven forbid Marius ends up picking her over Eponine, but there is a very interesting psychology to that, if you will. There is kind of like just kind of interesting layers to that I'm going to be exploring. And also another episode that I do want to discuss is also one of my favorite books, which is A Farewell to Arms by Ernest Hemingway. Now, one thing that bothers me is about how, you know, just in most reviews that I've seen of A Farewell to Arms, it's like whoever's reviewing it tends to just love to rake Hemingway over the coals for that book. And when I'm reading the reviews, I kind of question, I'm like, do you even know why he wrote the characters the way he did? Because if you do research on his life, and you especially research A Farewell to Arms and what might have, you know, what the type of, you know, the characters and the people that are said to have influenced the characters in the story, you understand why he wrote the characters the way he did. And if I may be bold, it does kind of drive me a little crazy when people just kind of like switch to the default, especially if it's like a pre-21st century man who wrote the book, like they seem to immediately revert to, oh, he just hated women. It's like, no, not really. No, I mean, I'm not saying that that didn't exist, but to just make a blanket statement like that, I mean, I think is actually quite dangerous. And if you, you know, if you talk to a lot of us that are in the living history world, a lot of us will tell you that we absolutely hate averages because, you know, kind of like what I said earlier about how people in, you know, in olden days were actually just as diverse in their beliefs that as people today are. You know, you kind of really can't, you know, cast like a complete blanket over them. So I'll be discussing a little bit of that, and I'll also be, I do want to do also an episode on, and this plagues the living history world, the reenactment world, the literary world, even the music world, and pretty much a lot of the worlds are the purists. Now, you know, I am, at heart, I am a purist, but I'm also in the entertainment world, so I understand that, you know, in order to, especially in the history and literature worlds, you kind of have to be entertaining with your presentation, because if you just do, like, you know, just like, I mean, we might find like, you know, just timelines of events interesting, but the general public, I mean, a lot of them, they need to have some form of entertainment with their history. So there's that, but there's also people that are just strictly entertainment, and they don't even care about, you know, any type of accuracy. They just want to be entertaining to the people that they're giving a tour to or talking to. There's actually, like, well, when I became the site director at the John Neville house, one of the things I did was I went through the tour book, and I actually did eliminate a couple of the history myths, you know, because I was like, you know, not on my watch, you know, we're not going to be repeating that. But yeah, so, but those are just some things I'm going to be covering, and just how I understand where the purists are coming from, but at the same time, you do have to be careful, because if you're too harsh, if you're too critical, you might chase away, you know, somebody who might have been quite an asset to the community. So, you know, so those are just like a couple things that I am going to be discussing, and, you know, in the podcast, and just, you know, and, you know, just kind of delving into that a little bit more, along with doing on-camera interviews and everything, because I always enjoy doing that. But yeah, so that's just a little bit of my background in living history, and I thank you for watching again tonight. I know I was a little late, which probably messed you up, but, you know, thanks for tuning in anyway. And next week we'll be back to our regular schedule of 7 p.m. And I'll be getting a little bit more into some history myths and everything. And who knows, maybe I'll dress up in 18th century attire for that one. We'll see how things play out. So, all right, well, thank you very much for tuning in, and yeah, I look forward to all that's to come, everything from the podcast to the new Darkside of the Labyrinth to also even some new film projects that I'm on. I'm going to be filming another episode of Heroinberg, which I'm really excited about. And also, yeah, the new music and stories. I'm going to be writing another installment of Once Upon a Moonlight Path for those at my Patreon. So, yeah, so swing on over. And, yeah, so thank you very much. And, yes, I will see you again next Friday. And this time it will be back to our 7 p.m. slot. All right, thanks very much, and have a good night.